So, what determines whether the deadweight loss from a tax is large or small? Okay. Can you think of what are the factors that will determine the size of this area? This is simple geometry, there is no economics involved. For example, if you make this demand curve more steeper, then you see that the area, what will happen to the area. Look at this case. So, here what we are doing, we are making the supply curve inelastic. So, that means supply is more steep, demand is as it is. And what is the deadweight loss? Obviously, this is the area, this is the size of a tax, this is the deadweight loss area, inelastic supply. So, when supply is inelastic, the deadweight loss of a tax is small, you can see. If you make this supply elastic, look at this supply elastic, and how do you make elastic? Elastic means it is more flat. And what is the economic meaning? Elasticity means suppliers are now more responsive towards a price change. So, when tax is imposed, many sellers will leave the market and existing sellers will change their supply drastically. What will happen? Look at this. So, when the size of the tax is same, if you change the slope of the supply curve, then deadweight loss is increasing. So, as elasticity falls, as elasticity increases, earlier it was inelastic, now it is elastic. So, what is happening? Size of the deadweight loss is increasing. So, when supply is relatively elastic, deadweight loss of tax is large, and that is very obvious, because elastic suppliers means there would be too much of a response from the supplier when tax is imposed. Many sellers will leave the market, existing sellers also will supply very less amount, and that is how there would be too much loss in producer surplus, and that will determine the area of this triangle, which is nothing but the deadweight loss. Same thing for the demand curve. Here supply is same, demand is little inelastic. So, look at what is happening, same tax, this is the amount of deadweight loss. If you make it more elastic, then what will happen? Look at this. Okay. This is what is happening. So, that means what one thing we can say, that for the same amount of tax, deadweight loss basically depends on elasticity of the demand and supply. Higher the elasticity of demand or supply, higher would be the size of deadweight loss. So, larger the decline in equilibrium quantity, because the greater the elasticities of demand and supply, the greater would be deadweight loss. That is what we have learned. Okay. Now, what is happening to government revenue? If you increase the tax, whether tax revenue will increase monotonically, or will it first increase and then decrease? What will happen to tax revenue? Some economists argue that taxes on labor income is highly distorting. They have high deadweight losses because they believe that labor supply is elastic. Okay? If tax is imposed on income, so people have very less incentive to work more. How do they adjust? Workers who can adjust the number of hours they work, they will adjust the number of hours. Or maybe families will think twice to send the second earners also to the labor market. Anyway, there is too much of tax. Elderly, okay, may retire early and don't plan to work further post retirement. Okay, workers in the underground economy will also change depending on the elasticity. Okay. So, since the underground work is not taxed, so that income will increase. So, more you tax on legal work, the illegal works will go up. That is how different workers will respond to the tax. So, when with each increase in the tax rate, the deadweight loss of the tax rises even more rapidly than the size of the tax. Okay, let us try to understand this. So, initially this is the tax rate. Okay, this is the tax rate, small tax. What is the tax amount? The difference between this. So, tax is small, deadweight loss is also small in this area, and this is the tax revenue, this triangle. If you increase, if you make the size of the tax double, let us say earlier it was 5%, now it is 10%. So, the size of this tax becomes double, let us say this much. Look at what is happening. This is tax revenue. Now, size of the tax is double than what it was earlier. So, what is happening? Deadweight loss increased, tax revenue also increased. Okay. All right. So, but how much is the increase in deadweight loss? Please try to understand. Earlier it was only this much. Now, if I divide this entire area by equal size triangle of 4 pieces, it would be easy for us to understand. When the tax size increased by become double, look at the deadweight loss, it has increased 4 times, quadruple. So, an increase in tax rate by 2 times is increasing the deadweight loss 4 times. That means, we can understand that deadweight loss is increases at an increasing rate with the tax rate. If we plot deadweight loss on the y axis and tax in the x axis, then what we should expect, as the tax rate increases, deadweight loss will increase at an increasing rate. That is the meaning. When tax rate increases twice, 2 times, deadweight loss increases 4 times. That is what we meant. So, when the tax rate doubles, the deadweight loss quadruples. And now, you have a very large tax. Look at what is happening to deadweight loss and what is happening to tax revenue. Tax revenue is becoming very less, but deadweight loss has increased even more. So, that means, if you now plot the relationship between tax rate and tax revenue and tax rate and deadweight loss, you see that deadweight loss is increasing at an increasing rate with the tax rate, while tax revenue is first increasing and then falling. So, we can expect an inverted U-shape relationship between tax revenue and tax rate, while this type of relationship between tax rate and deadweight loss. Look, it is increasing at an increasing rate. Okay. Now, we will plot instead of deadweight loss, we will put tax revenue on the y axis. So, what is happening? Tax revenue equals to tax rate into quantity bought and sold. So, total revenue is to T into Q. T increases, then quantity will fall. Therefore, the effect of tax on TR is ambiguous. When T increase in T causes TR to fall, TR to increase when tax rate is low, we have seen in the diagram. But when tax rate is higher, then total revenue is falling. Okay? And this is the relationship given by the famous economist Laffer, and that is known as Laffer curve. Please remember, the inverted U-shaped relationship between tax rate and tax revenue is known as Laffer curve. As tax rate increases, tax revenue will first increase and then go down. Okay? Increase and then go down. This is the relationship. So, tax revenue will first increase and then come down. So, then the question is, if this is the case, there must be some optimum tax rate, okay, beyond which government should not increase its tax rate. As tax is increasing, what will happen? As tax is rate is increasing, so initially people will supply less labor, but the reduction would be relatively lower. As a result of which, when you multiply T into Q, that is increasing. So, government should increase tax up to this point T1. T1 is the optimum tax rate, and beyond T1 it makes no sense to increase the tax rate further, because that is reducing the tax revenue. Okay. So, some case studies, let us discuss what happens to tax rate. So, Laffer curve depicts the relationship between tax rate and tax revenue. Supply side economics refers to the view that a tax rate would induce more people to work and thereby have the potential to increase tax revenues. If you reduce the tax rate, then laborers will have extra incentive to work more, and large tax cuts were adopted during the Reagan administration in the US, and the results do not settle the debate on the validity of supply side economics. Okay. Let us see what is happening to the US. Between 1970 and 1990, what happened to the tax rate in the US and France? French tax rate rose 59% from 49%. So, 10% increase in French tax rate. However, the US tax held almost same at 40% during 1970 and 1990. So, the average French person of working age, they logged 24.4 hours a week in the early 70s when the tax rate was 49%, but in the mid 90s French work week had shrunk to 17.5 hours, while in the US work week had grown to 25.9 hours. So, this is the data from a research given by Edward Prescott, one of the famous Nobel laureate economists. Look at this figure. If you compare tax rate and how people work, see higher the tax rate, highest tax rate is in Italy, and their work week is only 16.5 hours. Then in France it is 59%, 17.5 hours. Germany also 59.5%, 19.3 hours. Canada 52%, so work week is 22.8. UK is 44%, work week is 22.9, even more. USA 40%, Japan is only 37%. So, that means you can easily understand, lower the tax rate, higher is the work week, higher is the tax rate, lower is the work week, because tax gives some disincentive to the people to work more. That is what we have learned. So, that means this chapter, throughout this discussion, what we have understood, that tax is actually giving a negative impact. So, both buyers and sellers, they are disturbed, their behavior is not like what they are doing earlier. Okay. Tax creates a distortion. However, without tax we would not have a functioning government, as the famous economist Oliver Wendell Holmes, the Supreme Court justice once said that taxes are the price that we pay for a civilized society. Okay. So, now if we have to avoid tax, then probably we have to live in a jungle, not in a civilized society, because in a civilized society we are enjoying many benefits for which we must pay a price. So, tax is considered the price what we must pay for living in a civilized society. So, if we summarize whatever we have learned using the simple demand and supply, that market equilibrium without any government intervention, particularly if the market is perfectly competitive, characterized by many buyers and sellers, they always maximize social welfare. How we have defined social welfare? We have defined social welfare as the summation of consumer surplus and producer surplus. So, when no tax is imposed, there is no government intervention, price paid by the buyer and price received by the seller is exactly same amount, and that is called the market clearing price. And at that market clearing price, total surplus is maximum, social welfare is maximum. Now, next we learn that government is imposing tax. Why this is so? Because government is trying to finance the money which is required for undertaking many government projects. So, there are different forms of taxation. Either it could be tax imposed on your income, or tax imposed on a particular commodity which is called sales tax. We are all aware of sales tax, income tax, service tax, and then nowadays the GST. There are different forms of tax. So, the subject matter in taxation is huge. However, in this particular session we discussed only a simple model of taxation, which is tax imposed per unit of the output, but the learning from this taxation can be generalized. So, we started with a debate whether tax should be imposed on buyer or on the seller. Then we understood by comparing the situation that whether you impose tax on buyer or tax on seller, the outcome is going to be the same. What is the outcome? Buyer will pay extra than what they were paying earlier. Sellers will receive less compared to what they are receiving earlier. And the difference between the price paid by the buyer and price received by the seller is the tax amount. Okay? And how will you analyze this case? You take demand and supply, and then you shift your demand curve when tax is imposed on the buyer. How do you do that? You first assume that somebody is paying the tax on behalf of the buyer. So, price is falling to 8.50 in our example, and that is how you determine the shift in the demand curve. And once you know the shift, then you remove or take this assumption away, right? Take this assumption away. So, basically that will help you understand what is the incidence of taxation. That means, even though tax is imposed on the buyer, some portion of the tax sellers are also bearing. Okay? So, how much of the tax burden will be shared by the buyer, how much of the tax burden will be shared by the sellers, that is known as incidence of taxation. And obviously, the incidence of taxation depends on the relative slope of the demand and supply. Okay? So, that is what we learned, that it does not matter whether tax is imposed on buyer or seller, outcome is going to be the same, and that is why we say that tax is imposed on the commodity instead of saying whether it is imposed on buyer or seller. All right. And then we saw that when tax is imposed, that imposes some cost to the society. You might be thinking, yes, because we are paying higher price and sellers are receiving lower price, that is the cost to the society, but that is actually not the cost. Cost of taxation is arising because government is not able to take the entire consumer surplus and entire producer surplus in his pocket. If that was the case, there would not have been any kind of deadweight loss or cost of taxation, because anyway government is going to spend that money for you, for me, for many other citizens. Cost of taxation is arising because there is a fall in consumer surplus, there is a fall in producer surplus, that means there is a fall in total surplus which is not going to the government's pocket, and that is defined as cost of taxation and termed as deadweight loss. A fall in total surplus after taxation which the government is not able to recover. That loss in total surplus is totally lost. That is why it is called dead weight loss. Okay. We have also seen two things. When tax is imposed, how the tax revenue is changing, and how the deadweight loss is also changing. So, we saw that when tax rate becomes doubles, earlier it was 5%, now let us say it is 10%. Okay. So, deadweight loss increases by 4 times. So, a 5% increase in tax rate is leading to 20% fall in total surplus, and therefore, if you plot the tax rate in the x axis and deadweight loss in the y axis, then we see that deadweight loss is increasing at an increasing rate. That is the relationship between deadweight loss and the tax rate. However, when we plot the same tax rate with tax revenue, initially when the tax rate is very low, if you increase the tax little bit, your revenue will increase, because let us say it is a labor supply. Okay? Labor supply. When tax is imposed on the labor supply, then what happens that initially people may not respond drastically. Let us say earlier it was 2%, now it has become 3%. So, people or the laborer, they either may respond, may not respond, or even if they respond, the response would be much lower. As a result of which government's revenue will increase. But if you impose too much of tax on the laborers, what will happen? Government, probably the laborer will allocate more labor hours towards leisure. See, any particular worker has two options, either to work and earn money, or to enjoy and take rest at home, that is called leisure, because if you enjoy your time with family, that also gives you some kind of satisfaction. Okay. So, when tax is very low, opportunity cost of taking rest is very high, because that time I will be thinking, if I take rest at home, that means I am sacrificing 500 rupees which I can earn by participating in the labor market. Now, suppose government has imposed a 30% income tax. So, even if you earn 500 rupees, probably you have to pay some 150 or 200 rupees as tax, you will have only 250 or 300 rupees in your hand. That means higher the tax, lower would be the opportunity cost of taking leisure. Then laborers will think, okay, since now you have increased the tax rate, it is better for me to work less and take rest at home. So, laborers will reallocate their time towards more leisure, labor supply will fall, and some of the laborers they even exit the labor market. Then what will happen? Then there will be fall in labor supply, that means there will be reduction in producer surplus, and government would not be able to catch that part of the fall in producer surplus. Okay. So, as a result of which there would be only reduction in your tax revenue. So, when tax rate becomes too much, there would be reduction in tax revenue. So, initially it will increase, then it will fall. So, that means we will get an inverted U-shape relationship, which is known as Laffer curve, given by the famous economist Laffer. So, since it is inverted U-shape relationship, from any inverted relationship we get some optimum value. Since here we are measuring tax rate, we are talking about optimum tax rate, which is T star. Okay. So, then as long as this relationship is upward sloping, okay. So, as long as your tax rate is lower than the optimum, you can always increase your tax rate. But once you reach optimum, it does not make any sense to increase your tax rate further, because your tax revenue will come down. That is what we learned. So, that means compared to free market equilibrium, which was maximizing social welfare, tax is imposing a cost to the society in the form of deadweight loss. However, government must also collect tax, otherwise government would not be able to finance many of the government projects. The idea is government will impose tax on wealthy people and then redistribute that money to the poorer section, either by giving subsidy or by providing infrastructure. Otherwise, not many people would be able to participate in the market and thereby getting benefit from them. So, leaving everything on market, yes, it is maximizing social welfare, but there is no distributional aspect in that. Okay? The summation is maximum, but we are not talking anything about who is actually gaining how much from that particular social welfare. That is why, even though there is a negative impact, there is a cost in terms of deadweight loss, government must intervene and impose tax wherever possible. Of course, while imposing tax, government must keep in mind that tax rate should not be too low or should not be too high. Too low of tax rate means too less of tax revenue. Too much of tax rate also is equally harmful. So, government must always think about the optimum tax rate, keeping in mind the deadweight loss. Okay. So, to finance government projects, government must intervene in the market by imposing tax, and we must keep in mind tax is the price that we pay for living in a civilized society. Okay. Even though we feel a pain, we have to think that this is how we are enjoying many other benefits. If we do not pay the tax, there is no service available and we have to live in jungle. So, with this we are closing our discussion. We discussed a very important topic, very important form of government intervention in the market, which is taxation. Tax is harmful, but still government has no other option but to impose tax to finance money for several projects. Thank you.